Hello, BookTube. We're doing a read-along on this channel of the Chronicles of Thomas Covenant by Stephen R. Donaldson, a fantasy series from 40 years ago. I'm doing this with a bunch of other really good booktubers, and we are choosing to ignore the very latest Chronicles of Thomas Covenant. Stephen R. Donaldson did the first trilogy of books. Then he did a second trilogy, roughly on the heels of the first one. And then he waited a very long time and did a third trilogy. We are ignoring the third trilogy. So we are dealing with the first and second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever. And we're doing one book a month from, I believe we started in July all the way until December. And my colleagues are doing one video a month on these books, and I get the impression a lot of my I'm doing this with I'm blanking on the exact roster. But I think most of the people that I'm doing this with had not read these books since they were teenagers and read them for the first time. And I have. And if you haven't, it's going to be a bucket of cold water in the face. They don't hold up well in many ways. They don't hold up well to a reading in the 21st century as an adult. And there's been a process of learning that, of realizing that. And it's made, I think I've got the impression that some of my colleagues in this read-along are sort of grateful that they're only doing one video a month. But I asked for an exception. You can see it coming a mile off if you know this channel. I asked for an exception to do a weekly read-along of every book. And that's been tough. It's been tough. As some of these books, the more you bear down on them, the more ugly stuff you see. These are the stories of Thomas Covenant, who is a man from our world, an author, a writer, a best-selling writer, a married man with a young child, who contracts leprosy. Actual leprosy. He ignores it for so long that it actually costs him 2 fingers on one hand. But eventually he loses his wife, he loses his child, they leave him, but he goes to the doctors and he goes and gets treatment. And the vigorous self-invigilation to make sure that he's not bruising or cutting himself, and also new medication, arrests his disease. But only at the cost of the disease being the center fact of his life. And that is the Thomas Covenant that we see in the opening chapters of the first book, in the first Chronicles of Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, Lord Foulsbane. And he has been unpersoned by the town where his farm is on the outskirts of town, and he's been unpersoned by the people in that town. They don't want a leper coming in to socialize or buy groceries or pay his bills. And at one point in the beginning of Lord Foulsbane, Thomas Covenant decides to do that, just to reassert some aspect of his personality. He's lost his virility, he's lost sensation in his hands and feet, but he still feels himself to be a person, and he's living off the royalties of his best-selling book. So he goes into town one day, and his nerve fails him, and he passes out, and wakes up in a fantasy land, an agrarian, Middle-earth style fantasy land that is full of health and vitality. The very berries that grow on the side of the road promote health. They're incredibly healthy. The beings of this place, which is called the land, can actually see each other's health. They can look and see it. When Covenant is there for a little while, he starts to realize that the land is working on him, that it's regenerating the nerves, the sensations in his hands and feet, and also reviving his loins, his withered loins. At the same time that he's realizing all of this, he is realizing that he was summoned to the land for nefarious purposes. The lords of the land, the wizards that rule the land, that safeguard it at a stone keep called Revelstone, have been at war forever with a malevolent being far to the east of the land called Lord Foul. And at the beginning of Lord Foulsbane, Lord Foul is up to his old tricks again and has a whole bunch of new implements to do that with, including a thing called the Staff of Law, which is an incredibly powerful device hewn from the one tree that gives it a knowledgeable wielder all sorts of sorcerous abilities, including abilities that Lord Foul doesn't possess on his own. And we follow this story in Lord Foulsbane, and it's looking to be a fairly normal thing. Jose Philippe Farmer did it. A whole bunch of writers have done this kind of story, where a fish-out-of-water, real-world person ends up in a fantasy land and somehow becomes crucial to its survival. In this case, it's the white gold wedding ring that Thomas Covenant still stubbornly wears, even though his wife has left him. It's an odd conversation piece in our world, but there is no white gold in the land, and it is a focus of chaos magic, of wild magic, that is so powerful that it's a threat to Lord Fowl. The only reason that Lord Fowl doesn't worry about it is because, as he tells Thomas Covenant, you don't know how to use it. You're no threat to me. And Covenant doesn't know how to use it. And he doesn't want any part of it either, because when he suddenly finds himself in a fantasy land where everything makes you healthy, he automatically assumes that when he passed out, he hit his head, and he's fantasizing that all of this is not real. And one of the things that he does, because he doesn't believe it's real, and because he is feeling nerve sensations that he hasn't felt for a long time, unaccountably, horribly, is to rape a preteen girl in Lord Fowl's Bane. And not only that, that weren't bad enough, it seems in the course of that novel, and now I have reread it now many times, I may not read it again, it seems in the course of that novel that not only does Covenant not rank that offense very highly on the list of things that he's doing wrong, but that Donaldson doesn't either. And I worry that that would be a stumbling block for a lot of people reading it, including maybe some of my co-hosts. A lot of people shoulder it on, and I urge them to, because there's a lot of really interesting creativity later on. It's a big hurdle to get over, but nevertheless, if you do, there are rewards. And we saw a lot of those in the second book in the trilogy, where Thomas Covenant returns to the land. It turns out that a great deal of time has passed. Time passes more quickly in the land than it does on our Earth. And involves himself in a war. The second book is called the Ill-Earth War, in which the Staff of Law plays a key role, and eventually leads to sort of a triumph on Lord Fowl's part. I mean, the good guys partially win. There's a fantastically realized battle sequence all throughout the book that eventually does end with the bad guys' army being destroyed. But the larger victory goes to Lord Fowl. And a lot of the things that were held true in the first two books are shattered by the events that happened in the Ill-Earth War. And that is where we pick up with the third book, The Power That Preserves, in which even more time has passed, and Covenant is resummoned to the land, and it's a land unlike anything that we have seen before, because the events at the end of the Ill-Earth War, specifically involving the power that Lord Fowl has been able to add to his own power because of the Staff of Law, has wrecked the land. Absolutely wrecked it. There's a gigantic army led by a perverted giant that is besieging Revelstone with the lords inside it. But not only that, it's not just that physically the lords are losing, it's also that the land has been ravaged, just ravaged. The moon is green. Healthy things no longer grow everywhere. Raiders and animals rampage everywhere, and there's an unceasing, unnatural winter. A biting wind that just rips inside you. And in the chapters that we're reading today, we're reading chapters 5 through 10 today. And in the chapters that we're reading today, we are sticking with Covenant. Once again, in Lord Fowl, in The Power That Preserves, just like in the Ill-Earth War, Donaldson makes the wise decision to split the narrative so that we're not always with Covenant, who is a bit of a grind. he's a bit of an a-hole, even when he's atoning for his horrible deeds. He's still a bit of an a-hole. He's a bit trying to deal with. In the first 5 chapters that we read, we saw him go to the land, and he is not summoned by the lords. This is the first time that that's happened. He's summoned. He's not summoned by the lords. He's summoned by amateurs, basically, people that he knows. A giant named Saltheart Foamfollower, and a villager that he met in Lord Fowl's Bane. And he's in the land, for good or ill, and he can see the ill all around him, that this beautiful place, even if it is just his imagination, has been destroyed. And he decides on what seems like the ultimate foolhardy quest. He decides to simply go to Lord Fowl's stronghold in the east of the land and confront him directly. As he puts it, pull that stronghold down around his ears. Keep in mind, he doesn't have any idea how to use the white gold. He's not any more knowledgeable than he was 2 books ago. He's just decided enough is enough. And that is the part of the book that we're still dealing with in the chapters that we're reading today, chapters 5 through 10, are just a greater elaboration of Covenant encountering this desecrated land, this ruined, cold land. He meets the woman, the young girl whom he raped. She is now, an elderly woman, and she dies in the course of these chapters. Her story arc is just debased from beginning to end. There's nothing good that happens to her as a result of her connection with Covenant. including that she loses her mind. It's just the story arc involving Lena, that's her name, from Lord Foulsbane to the chapters that we're reading today, is just horrible. Just a horrible thing for a writer to do to a character. Very involving, but horrible. And we also meet in these chapters, we get to know not only Saltheart Foamfaller, who we first meet as a joyful being. The giants are a joyful, loving, tail-loving people. But they're all gone now from the land. They were exterminated, except for the ones who were perverted to lead Lord Foul's army, and Saltheart Foamfaller. He's the last of the giants who's a giant unto himself. And he has become a bitter, partisan guerrilla fighter. He doesn't resemble the character we met in Lord Foulsbane at all. And in addition to that, there's Banner, who was a member of the Bloodguard, an unsleeping contingent of male warriors whose only goal was to protect the lords. And Covenant undoes that vow. They swore a vow that made them immortal, made them sleepless. And Covenant undoes that vow just by being an a-hole, just by being himself at the end of the Lilith War, in a thrilling chapter. It's really well done. But he breaks the loyalty of that vow. And when we meet Banner in this book, he's getting older. He has gray hair. And he's not a Bloodguard anymore. He's still himself, personality-wise, but he doesn't have the supernatural protection of his vow. And that is where we end things today. There's fighting, there's a major battle set piece, a character dies, characters are disillusioned, and Covenant learns a lot about the land. One of the main things he learns is that he's not healing at all. He's still sick. Can't feel his legs, his hands or feet, and is cold all the time, like all the other characters in this book are. And that's where it ends. This book is split in half between the narrative that focuses on Covenant and the narrative that focuses on the Siege of Revelstone. And next time, we are moving to that siege. The chapter that we're starting with, let me get to my chapter list here. The chapter that we're starting with next Sunday, we will be reading from chapter 11, the Ritual of Desecration, to chapter 15, Lord Morm's Victory. And those 5 chapters are about the Siege of Revelstone. They're about Lord Morm, who's a character that we've known for 2 books now. He's a fantastic character. And then we will move on. Then the story moves on to its conclusion. But for now, we have those 5 chapters. And the 5 chapters that we read today were a bit of a slog. I mean, they're unrelentingly depressing. There's no heroism. Pathetic characters are tortured and perverted and sometimes killed. And there's no hope. There's no redemption. There's not even any heroism in peril. There's nothing like that. In the first 10 chapters of this book, there's nothing like that. And there's precious little at the end of this book that's like that either. I'm not saying that it's bad. It's Donaldson's choice, and it's a legitimate one. But if you come to epic fantasy for that, you're not getting a lot of that in this book, except for the next 5 chapters. The ones we'll be talking about next week, where you do get that, and you get it in a miraculously good incarnation of that particular kind of fantasy writing. So those of you who have been slogging along with this and wondering, when is there a light at the end of the tunnel, the next 5 chapters are going to pay you back. They really are. So I'm going to wrap this up for now. I'm going to keep this relatively short. I'm going to wrap this up for now. That's where we are now. The land is sick. Covenant is sick. Evil is triumphant everywhere. And things are poised to change. So we will talk all about the beginnings of those changes next week. And I will see you then. Thank you, BookTube.